So we need to get the live stream started.
Oh, please.
Through the chair, the meeting is now live.
So Davey, I believe you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. Very good. I'm sure the mayor will be joining us soon, but I think we can get things started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of Finance and Corporate Services Committee. We have 5 items on the agenda. I would say mostly straightforward, but also very important items for many of the high priority items we have for this term of council. So I think let's just get right into it. And I'd ask for a mover for the 2 consent items moved by Councillor Ioannidis. Any Councillor Gazzola, your hand's up.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions on item number 1.
Item number 1, Councillor Marsh on the same item or the other, the second? Okay, so I'll take that as a motion to take those 2 items out of consent. Those in favor? And opposed, that carries. Okay, Councillor Gazzola, when you're ready.
Yeah, I just want to, reading the report, staff clearly indicate that a 3-way stop isn't warranted, and then they go on to say they'd like to put it in place. So I'm not quite understanding that, and along with that, it was warranted back in 2016. Was it did it come to council then to be put into place?
Mr. McCrimmon-Jones.
Through the chair to the councillor, the intersection was studied in 2016, and Zeller Drive has been on our radar for some time, looking at various solutions for the traffic issues that we're seeing out there. And to our surprise, we found that it was studied in 2016, but it never came forward. And based on the records and what we could find, there was no real reason why it didn't come forward. It could have been staff transition or something of that nature. But we did want to count it again in 2021 and compare those numbers with what we saw in 2016. Where it fell short this time was on the traffic in the AM peak. So we met the warrant on the split, and we met the afternoon warrant in terms of the hourly traffic, but the morning traffic brought the average down, which is why it wasn't warranted for an always stop. But we are, the reason for that, we feel strongly, is because of the COVID traffic patterns, especially with the 2 schools nearby, which have obviously been closed.
Was there any public engagement for this?
Through the chair to the councillor, there was not. We don't engage on issues related to always stop warrants. And that's just because we look at the requirements of the Ontario Traffic Manual, and we make engineering judgments because it's really safety driven. And that's why we made the decision to recommend it to council.
Good, Councillor Gazzola?
Yes.
Okay, Councillor Marsh, I know you're next, but I think I'm going to skip to Councillor Schneider because this is in his ward. I'm assuming he's on this item.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Davey. I just want to assure the rest of council that this is a safety measure that is really needed, as Mr. McCrimmon-Jones said, the 2 schools in the area, and this is one road that I do get quite a lot of emails and comments on, and I really want to thank Aaron and Stephen and Barry and Ivan, all the traffic team for all their work with me on this, and for looking into this and looking back at it. If you drive the area, you would probably wonder, like, why isn't there one there? And it's just a real good increase for safety. And I just wanted to thank staff for all their good and hard work on this.
Very good. Councillor Marsh on item number 2.
Thank you very much. So just a question about how staff expect this to play out if there were noise complaints. Because what I'm concerned about is the last time that we had a large event in that area, the noise complaints were not necessarily addressed right away. And so, yeah, if staff can just comment on the plan this time around. And secondly, I want to know for the weekend of the September 17th, which I love the idea, you know, like halfway through the year, let's do St. Patty's Day when we can. But I'm just wondering, on a Sunday night up until 11 p.m. on a school night, is that the best idea?
I don't see Ms. McNeil, so I think maybe Mr. May.
So through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps you can defer this item. I'll get, she's supposed to be on the call. I'm sure she's just tied up. I'll get her on the call near the end of the meeting and you could deal with it at that time.
Very good.
Through the chair, if I may, I'm sitting in Ms. McNeil's place. I can address those concerns.
Oh, pardon me. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Marsh. The pub has assured us that they are going to work with us. We did bring these concerns to them. They did assure us that they are going to work with us. So if we do receive noise complaints, music will be turned down, and they are very well aware that there has been complaints in the past and they are willing to work with us. With your concern with regards to Sunday night, that's what they've requested. Again, we will work with them if we are receiving complaints. It's a simple phone call to them to say, listen, we're receiving complaints, you need to turn it down. And they have assured us that they will do that.
Have you heard it from the proprietors, a reason why they want to go till 11 o'clock on Sunday? Do they expect that to be a big night for them, or?
No, that was what was requested. Ms. McNeil worked on it. I'm not sure why they want to go so late on the Sunday night. That's what they have requested.
Okay.
But again, they have assured us that they will work with us. We made that a stipulation of the requirement of the noise exemption,
Okay.
that they will work with us on it.
Well, that's great. And I'm all for supporting our local businesses, right, as I know all of council is. So I do, though, I want to put in a request that staff go back and ask them to limit the noise exemption to 9 p.m. on the Sunday. And I'm happy to get involved in any conversations if need be, just anticipating that sometimes just the way the weather is or the way the wind's blowing, it can really bother, people who are trying to get their kids to sleep. So, Chair Davey, I don't know if we would want to refer that to council instead of just, or if we want to vote on it now, but I would like to see the 9 p.m. change if it's not going to be a hardship for the business.
Well, what we could do, and it's your choice, Councillor Marsh. We could just go ahead and approve the 9 p.m. now, and if there's a bid reg flag between now and council, we can change it at that time. Or if you just want to defer it, just might save us a bit of time if we actually approve something now. But it's up to you.
Okay, I'm good with just changing the one date, the 19th, to be
9
till 9 p.m. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Okay, with that, then we will take the vote on that first. So we're going to vote on consent item number 2, the amendment to change the Sunday evening to 9 p.m. Those in favor? And any opposed? Didn't see any opposed. And we'll deal with the consent items all together. Those in favor? And any opposed? None opposed. Very good. Okay, we will move on to the first discussion item, the equity, inclusion, and anti-racism policy. There is no staff presentation for this, so if you have questions, any questions about this policy, I would ask you to raise your hand now. Councillor Chapman.
Yes, thank you. I'm really happy to see this coming forward, and I just have a few questions about some of the wording in the description section of the document. So the definition section. So under oppression, for example, let me just see if I can find it here. Sorry. On page, it appears in a number of places in the report, but on page 15 of the document, actually start on page 14, under definitions, equity, it says an equity approach seeks to create the conditions for fair and equal access. And I just wonder if the wording could be more, because a definition doesn't act in any way. It doesn't seek to create the conditions, but equity itself creates the conditions for fair and equal access. So I just wonder if we can take out the seeks in this case, or even yeah, an equity approach creating the conditions for fair and equal access, or creates the conditions for fair and equal access. Because it's not something that it would seek at that point. It's just a definition. Of course, you could use seek in a sentence in the context of what you're saying.
Would like to speak to
through,
it. Go ahead.
oh, right. Through you, Chair Davey. Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Chapman. So just to give you a bit of context, all of the definitions that are included in the policy were researched and drawn from sources such as the Ontario Human Rights Code, the Ontario Employment Standards Act, UNESCO, the UN, the WHO, Wellesley Institute, other research institutes focused on equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. And so just in terms of the development of this policy, that's kind of the background. But I think I have no problem with making that amendment based on your suggestion, because it is, you're right, it is about creating as opposed to seeking. I think when it comes to using that kind of language in policies, the reason that we would use something like seeking to or striving to in the policy is because that's where we're at right now. So in the rest of the policy, you'll see that language as well, but I think it's completely legitimate to use what you're suggesting in the wording for that definition. So I can make that change.
Yeah, and I'm really just focusing on the definitions in this case. So the same observation I'd like to make about oppression. It refers to deprived of privileges by the individual or group. And I wonder if privileges, we really mean rights. Like, are these rights of the individual or group, or are they Like, right sounds far more decisive to me. Anyway, I'll just leave these for you. The last one I wanted to point out is the anti-racism definition, where it says working to understand and dismantle racism. And again, I wonder if we can take out the working part and just say anti-racism shall mean understanding and dismantling racism. It just, because they're just definitions, a definition doesn't seek to do things or work towards something. It's a definition. This is what it means.
Yeah, absolutely. I have no problem with that as well.
Okay. The other question I had is, so there are two different policies here, right? One that is for counselors and others, I forget the divide, but in the first policy that's for full-time employees, management, non-union, temporary, etc. I don't recall seeing anything that referred to how one would, what the recourse is if somebody feels they're at the receiving end of harassment or whatever oppression, whatever the case may be. Should that be part of the policy, or maybe it's there and I just it was an oversight on my part.
So through the chair, again, so this is a good question as well, because it is, so the first policy, just to clarify, the equity, inclusion, and anti-racism policy is applicable to all city employees and direct volunteers. And so those are the two groups. So that would include everyone, management, and so on. And so in the application section of the policy, section 3.1, this is where we talk about, so section 3.1C talks about enforcement of this policy as the responsibility of all municipal leaders, such as supervisors, managers, directors, and department heads across the organization. And then D outlines that if city employee or volunteer conduct contravenes the expectations set out in this policy, they may be subject to discipline. And all disciplinary procedures will be implemented in accordance to the collective agreement or relevant human resources processes outlined for the employee or volunteer being disciplined. So we didn't put anything specific about that in this policy because that is already outlined in those other policies. And so I can make that more clear under that by actually putting in brackets which policies those are. So that would be discipline in the workforce, and looking at the entire procedural process that's outlined by the union collective agreements as well. Would that be something that you would support?
That would be fine. Yeah, it seemed to be
Just being more specific about that.
For the other group, for the other policy,
Yep.
It refers to the integrity commissioner. But here I didn't see that. But you've got it there, so it's up to you. You can tweak it if you think it might be helpful.
Can I add to that through you, Councillor Davey?
Please.
Sir, on top of that, Councillor Chapman, you'll see the related policies referenced at the top. There is the Respect in the Workplace, HUMWOR 140, and that's the mechanism with which we would receive reports and human resources would review, follow up on, investigate where warranted, and follow up with employees. So I can have Ellen circulate that policy to council for your interest if you'd like when she follows up on the other.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had to do with the integrity commissioner. I mean, who is our integrity commissioner? It's more my own ignorance. I don't know if I should know this or if we were told this at the beginning of our tenure, but if a councillor had a complaint, for example, where would one go?
Ms. Robb?
So through you, Councillor Davey, the Integrity Commissioner is a contracted service and the name is escaping me off the top of my head. So if Diana knows the name off the top of her head, I'll ask her to
ADR
interject.
Chambers. ADR Chambers, I
That's
think it
right.
is. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, ADR Chambers. So it's a contracted service. And the best way to access them, Councillor Chapman, if you're looking for support, would be through either Paul or through clerk's office, and they can provide you with the contact information.
Okay, I don't need the support, but I just wondered, I wasn't familiar with how that would happen.
And if I could add through you, through the chair, we did, so the Director of Legislative Services, Christine Tarling, did contact them directly and presented them with the changes that we were making to this code of conduct for council. And we asked specifically if they have the resources in order to make investigations based on claims that we've outlined here. And they assured us that they do, that they may have to increase their, they may have to use, more people within who they contract in order to do it, but they do have access to do that. So we have done that work ahead of time in making sure that they would be able to follow up on any complaints that were made or that came forward.
Okay. So we're just looking at the first document right now. One other thing, and I think it came in the first one. I noticed in one section of the document, it referred to harassment, and there are a series of words that were used, but none of those were defined in the definition part. Does it come under oppression? And if so, maybe they should just be inserted in that definition. Again, these are technical things, but I think it's important to make sure that they're there and clearly understood. And I can't remember where I saw it, but
through the chair.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we did have, everything that's in the definitions I did cross-reference to things that were in the policy. So if you wanted to be more specific about where it is, then I can look into that.
Okay, I'll send it to you.
Afterwards. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Chapman, before you turn your microphone off, I just wanted clarity then. So I'm not sure what you're looking for in terms of concrete changes versus suggestions. For example, I completely agree with the sentiment of removing seeking for equity and just changing that line to shall mean creating. But I do have a little bit of concern about replacing privileges with rights, because I'm not really sure what that means. And I also have some concern with anti-racism. You wanted to remove the part working towards, whereas I see anti-racism as more of a process than a static thing. So I thought the working towards was. So do you want to formalize that, or would you rather work with staff in the interim? And if there's any concrete changes you want to push at the at council, we could deal with it then.
Well, I'd like to see those changes, so I don't know what the best way to proceed would be. I mean,
Okay.
if it's going to be, I'm happy to work with staff to think it through.
Okay, let's think on that while we work through the other folks in the queue here. Thank you. Next up, Mayor Verbenovich.
Thanks, Chair Davey, and thank you both Ms. Murdoch-Silk and Ms. Charles Watson for bringing both of these reports forward today. I know, Ellen, that this has been a big body of work that's come out of your leadership of the task force over the past couple of years, and so I want to commend you on that and the great document that's before us. I do want to touch on one thing, and maybe it's in some ways, I won't say the elephant in the room, but maybe I will say the elephant in the room, is that we're touching on council and staff. We're touching on sort of direct committees of council, but we're not getting into other things such as our neighborhood associations, our affiliated groups, and so on. And I'm wondering if staff have given any thought to that, and in fact, what that might look like if we were to include that, and or when the appropriate time would be to look at that. Because I know we also have to be cautious that we're not biting off more than we can chew.
Mr. May?
Yes, Mr. Chair, maybe I can respond to that. It's an important topic and one that we've discussed at a staff level for some time now. We know that one of the things that the municipality can do is look to work with those indirect groups, our sports groups, our neighborhood associations, those types of groups to embed this work, or even, for an example, tier 1 grant organizations, many of whom receive a significant amount of money from the municipality. And we should be leveraging those investments on work like this. And so it's something we've discussed. It's not something that's covered in this policy. And my suggestion would be, if it's something that council would like to see move forward, it would likely be a different body of work, and staff would want to report back on options to make that happen.
Okay, so I appreciate that answer, and I do understand that it is complex, and it's also trying to make sure that we do a really good job of the pieces that are here. But I think it is an example of an area where we can actually use some of the tools in our toolbox to spread the work that we're trying to do beyond directly our organization, but those who are affiliated, and who, quite frankly, if there was ever an issue, we would get dragged into it anyway. And so I think we have an obligation to look at that. I don't think, Mr. Chair, that anybody has indicated a desire to move this yet. So I'd be prepared to move it at the appropriate time, but I would also add that we ask staff to come back with some options for looking at those other groups in a future, as a part of a future report.
I'll take that as an amendment then. Thank you. Who's next here? Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Davey, and really excited by, I think this is the evolution of our community to be more, I guess, observant of diverse, I guess, individuals that make up our community, and to be more reflective of our staffing in that, and at the same time, our policies to ensure that they're sensitive, at the same time, alleviate or get rid of any barriers from inclusion. So this is absolutely important body of work, and very supportive in the direction we're heading, and the work that's come before this, to have brought these recommendations forward from the task force, and of course the work done by Ms. Silk and Ms. Trent Watson. So appreciate them as well, as already said by Mayor Verbenovich. My question is to ensure that we are internally, I guess, internally accountable as well. The policy is important. It sets out the framework, and the language is important to get it right. And I think we're there. But at the same time, the sense of accountability, how we deliver services to our citizens. And if there is experience, prejudice or racism or just barrier from inclusion, what avenue within this policy is set out that members of the public can make their voices heard? It's important not just to have policies, but it's also even more so important to have accountability or easy access to be able to be heard. So can you reference from this policy where that can be pinpointed and say, yes, anyone that feels not included, feels that excluded from services or not being fairly, fair representation, that they have an avenue to be heard.
Is more like so? Oh, I think you're muted.
Thank you. That's a really important component of this policy. Actually, you've kind of hit exactly on where this policy is actually quite different than other municipal policies that have a similar, that are trying to do similar things, and that is the accountability piece. So as we've outlined in section 4.2 of the policy under details, one of the points, the fifth one, E, is to, first of all, so there's a couple of different things that I can say in response to your question, Councillor Singh. One is to ensure ongoing data collection and public accountability. That's something that the policy is spells out in terms of what we'll be doing as part of this policy. And part of the policy is to track all activities related to the implementation of this policy and reporting the data publicly a minimum of once per year, which means, so that's just the beginning part. So that's saying, like, here's what we're doing, here's all the things that we're doing with this policy, and we can tell the public and report back to, these are our results so far. So high level updates on the work of the Equity, Anti-Racism, Indigenous Initiative team, disaggregated demographic data collection across the corporation, the tracking data for all staff completion of equity and anti-racism training, as well as tracking data for all policy and procedure reviews that have been completed using an equity, inclusion, and anti-racism lens as one of the other elements of the policy, which is outlined in 4.2a is the identification removal of systemic barriers. So here in the policy, the city is committing to a process of identifying and removing systemic barriers in programs and services, which will include that all municipal policies and procedures will be reviewed from an equity and inclusion and anti-racism lens when they're scheduled for regular review. So that's kind of the first part of, like, how are we accountable to the public? And so all of these things that we're doing, we're going to be accountable to the public for, in terms of, there's been a couple of different ideas of how this is going to happen. One suggestion is around a public dashboard that we can put all of these numbers on, in terms of, like, here's all the people that have gone through the training, here's all the different policies and procedures that we've now reviewed, and sort of ongoing sort of data collection in terms of the demographics and that sort of thing. So that's one part of it. And then another part, which is also highly important, is the ongoing community engagement piece. And that's really what you're kind of getting at too, right? It's like, how do people from the community bring their concerns? And so we have many avenues of that happening moving forward, one of which we're going to be, talking about after this item, which is the creation of the Equity and Anti-Racism Advisory Committee. So that's one component. But in terms of the actual team that's being built right now under Suzanne Charles Watson, the members of those team are all expected to be doing community engagement and be engaged in the community, including the person who is going to be doing the research and data collection for the team. And so that's a really big part of it too. It's like we want to make sure that we're still embedded, this work is still embedded in the community, and that we're doing ongoing evaluation. And so at the very end of the policy, section 5 is monitoring and accountability. And so what's outlined here is that accompanying each component of this policy will be an evaluation framework, which will serve to monitor implementation progress and anticipated outcomes related to this policy. And part of evaluation is going to be the inclusion of community voice as well. And so that's going to be an ongoing mechanism for feedback from within the community, particularly on the issues that you talked about, which is, you know, programming, services, that sort of thing. And so I have been working as part of the data collection strategy for the city. I've been working closely with customer service around this very thing. So how can we capture people's experiences within the services that we offer, and look at like the demographic data collection in addition to the customer service, and be able to correlate those two sources of data. And so there's lots of different things that are kind of underway, but I think, you know, having this written right into the policy the way that it is ensures that there will be accountability, both internally and from within the public.
And that's fantastic to hear. And that's why I think I agree with the comment that you made, that perhaps that's sort of, you know, what we're doing apart from, you know, what we've seen out there in the community, or, you know, other cities, or, you know, the steps that they're taking, that it's just not policy for the sake of policy. It's real work that we're driving to formulate actual change. And that can't be done without the honesty of the data that's being gathered. And it's not just for internal consumption, but the community needs to know that the ongoing work that we're doing, ongoing struggles and the difficulties where they lie. And sometimes that's difficult information to compile and process, and just, you know, it's a tough conversation to have, but I think it's a very important conversation to have. And that's something we just can't afford to shy away from. So as raw as it is, I think we need to make it prevalent and available. And that too, of course, I agree, it has to be through some sort of, you know, online portal or dashboard where that information is accessible. But more importantly, and this is the last thing that you mentioned, it needs to be simplistic. We just can't create more people that can be contacted if people feel like, you know, there's serious concern. There needs to be an ongoing stream of communication. So we have to make it as simplistic as possible. I'm not saying this needs to be done through the overarching policy that we're trying to approve right now. This is a very high level document. I just hope that we get to some of these points through this policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Oh, thank you. I think Councillor Ioannidis was next.
Oh, apologies, Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you. That doesn't matter. It was okay. If you had went. I guess my question is, again, I guess it's following along the lines with some of my other colleagues have mentioned. Because in the past, what I've noticed with regards to a lot of our policies, there is no teeth when it comes to when we see some form of infraction. So how are we going to ensure that there's some teeth to this policy with regards to infractions?
Silk.
Through the chair. So yeah, as was asked earlier, in terms of the teeth really comes from the other policies that are already in place. The human resources policies that outline the steps that will be taken when infractions take place, and the kinds of discipline that will follow. As I mentioned, it didn't make sense to reiterate all of those different points in this policy because they're already spelled out in another policy. And so we did work extensively with both a human rights lawyer and an employment lawyer in creating this policy. And in particular, looking at that exact issue, because that's something that was also very much on the minds of senior leadership when we were going through this policy. And so in the application piece, it is, I mean, although the process of accountability and discipline isn't spelled out in this policy specifically, there is a very clear section around the application of this policy and what it means in terms of, you know, any conduct which contravenes the expectations set out in this policy. So that is outlined in section 3.1 of the policy under D. And it goes into sort of all of the different things that would be under, like, that would be considered a contravention of the expectations, which also includes, you know, off-duty conduct, which may impact legitimate business interests of the employer or the city. And so that was put in there very specifically in order to make sure that we can, so that this policy does have teeth. Because as you mentioned, and has Councillor Singh mentioned earlier, this policy is really striving to be action oriented as opposed to just words that are a guideline. And so it is through the other human resources policies that would be, and in terms of the discipline policy as well as respect in the workplace, those two policies are the ones where all of that is outlined.
Okay, maybe I should have been a little more clarification, maybe with regards to, let's say, council in general, when they're not held accountable.
Through the chair, as was mentioned earlier, there is a separate process for that, and that would be something, I mean, that's something that's very clearly outlined in the Code of Conduct. I don't know if Ms. Robb, if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, so that would be your integrity commissioner type stuff, right, Bill?
Yeah, but okay, all right. I just find that it usually, we don't get much teeth with regards to infractions, and I know we go through the integrity commissioner, but it just doesn't seem to stick really well. But anyways, that's my opinion, sorry. But anyways, thank you for this groundbreaking work and for all the great work that you've all done. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, thanks. A lot's been said already. I don't want to repeat what's been said. I just want to say that I'm very pleased to see this come forward, and I see that this will be a living policy. It's not going to be the kind of policy that we will just put in place and then review in a decade. This is going to be an ongoing living document that we will. I'm excited to see what happens as we go. So thank you to staff for bringing it forward so quickly. And Ms. Watson, we're looking forward to seeing more of you as we see your team grow.
Okay, very good. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Davey. And I just wanted to echo as well the thanks to staff for putting this together. I mean, to me, it really sums up that we are going to be looking through the looking to remove systemic barriers by using the equity lens on all things that we do as we move forward. So to me, that kind of sums up where we're going, and I really appreciate that will in terms of how we operate and as well as our policies and procedures moving forward. And I think that we as a council, as a community, as staff members, there's a lot for us to learn and unlearn here, and it's exciting work going forward. And I want to say a welcome to Ms. Charles Watson as well as we move forward on this together. Work. So thanks again.
Okay, very good. That concludes the questions. Councillor Chapman, if you queue in for 1 second, just in the interest of trying to streamline this, I'm actually okay with the working part, and in terms of replacing privileges with rights. I just had a thought, why not both? Why not just change it from, when we want to say rights or privileges, and that should cover off everything that we might be concerned about restricting. So if you're okay with that, then we'll take that as I think we would take that as a combined motion, but I would want your approval before.
When you say you're okay with the working thing, you're saying leaving it there or taking it out?
You can leave it there. I don't think it's a material difference, so I'm okay.
Well, no, I'm saying take it out.
Yeah, no, sorry. I mean, you can take it out. I don't think it's a material difference either way.
And
Yeah.
you want to add privileges and rights? I'm okay with that if that's what you're suggesting.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good. So we'll take that as an amendment as well as Mayor Vrbanovic's amendment, and just
I'll work with staff for the wording of that, if that's okay.
for sure. Yeah. And if there's anything significantly different, then
Yeah,
sure,
no.
we can bring that to council. Ms. Rob, I have your hand up, or is it just from before?
Yeah, no, it is my hand up. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Through you, Chair Davey. I do just want to take that language around rights and privileges away. As Ms. Morleg-Silk mentioned, we did have the policy reviewed by both a human rights lawyer and an employment relations lawyer, and that language was suggested by them. And so I do want to take it away to get their opinion on any substantive changes that would be a result of changing the language from privileges to rights and privileges.
Okay, so Ms. Chapman, then how about Councillor Chapman, why don't we just defer those definitions to council and then we can approve the rest? And is that okay?
Well, are the other definitions, or Ms. Rob, do you think they're?
Yep, we'll take those as unsubstantive and
okay. We'll just remove the rights and privileges, or put that on hold.
Okay, very good. Okay, so just before we vote on this too, I just want to extend my sincere thank you to Ms. Morleg-Silk and Ms. Watson for this. This is much needed, but also not an easy policy to put together, because there's a lot of, there's a lot of roadblocks and misperceptions out there. So when I read through this, I thought it was exactly, frankly, what I was hoping for. So great work there. Okay, so with that, it's been moved by Mayor Vrbanovich, but first we're going to vote on the changes, some of the wording changes by Councillor Chapman, and the referral of the one item to council. Okay, so those in favor? And none are opposed. And then we will also take the amendment from Mayor Vrbanovich on including other community groups such as our community associations, et cetera, in this work. Those in favor? Okay, and none are opposed to that. And then the main motion as moved by Mayor Vrbanovich with the included amendments. Those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Very good. All right. We will move on to the second item, and that is the Equity and Anti-Racism Advisory Committee to Council. And again, there is no staff presentation for this, so please just cue in if you have any questions. Beginning with Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to get a sense of staff's perspective on how council might be able to stay connected with this advisory committee despite not being members on the committee. And I fully support that move. I think it's the right move. We have an advisory committee. We should not be dominating or even having a perception that we are influencing the discussion. We want to hear from the committee. So, but I still think that it would be good to have opportunities for back and forth.
Ms. Morleg-Silk.
Through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Marsh, for bringing this up, because this is something that we've actually discussed quite a bit behind the scenes in terms of what this could look like. And I didn't put anything specific in the report because I didn't want to dictate what this might look like, because it would be great to hear from you and other members of council on this point. So there's been a couple of suggestions. One is that we have a regular reporting cycle that would go to council on a regular basis, like similar to what Compass Kitchener does, whether it's once every 3 months or once every 4 months or 2 months or whatever, in terms of making sure that council is briefed on the work plan, the overall mandate, the priorities for this group, as well as any work that they had been doing. And so one would be a reporting mechanism. So that's one element. But we also very much want to encourage a collaborative approach when it comes to this committee, because this advisory committee, the vision for this advisory committee is that they can actually be brought in by council on issues that council seems or feels that they need advice on, or perspective from within this advisory committee. And so we would have mechanisms of communication set up with the staff member who is responsible for this committee and council as well, in terms of invitation for collaboration and communication. And in addition to that, another purpose for this committee is for members of the advisory committee to bring things forward to council in terms of like, here's something that's going on in the community. Maybe you're not aware of it, but this is what's happening, and to sort of, help with perspective and that sort of thing. And so all of those things are part of the vision of what we're hoping this advisory committee can do with council. And what that looks like and how that's going to be set out is something that we can collaborate with you on once the committee is set up and we have the staff members and the staff team set up to do that. It's just at this point, we don't want to set anything in stone because it's something that needs to be kind of collectively decided on. And so if any of those things sound like something that you would want, then that's what we've already been thinking, but feel free for anyone to make more suggestions if you have any.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, so I'm sure that in the fullness of time, as our colleague, Councillor Gazzola likes to say, that we will see a good way forward. One suggestion to consider, I think, would be to, instead of having a council member or two sit on the committee, to have a council member or two appointed in our annual appointment time to be the champion of the committee, to be the one that would be, sort of the one to go back and forth with if the committee had, interest to communicate with council and sort of have an inroad to say, well, what else is going on at council that maybe we should know about, and vice versa. So anyway, it's just a suggestion right now, but it's not the time to make a decision. So that's about that. So that's good. Anyway, at the appropriate time, Mr. Chair, I would like to move this recommendation.
Very good. I unfortunately missed the order of the next three. So I'm just going to go in the order I have them on my screen, which would put Councillor Chapman next.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I think this is a great idea. The committee, it sounds like it's being carefully thought through. I also had a question about the reporting back, but I think that's been addressed. I think it would be good to have it, every few months or whatever seems appropriate. One of my questions has to do with, so if I think more and more we will be applying an equity lens to things that we do at City Council. And if an issue comes up and maybe we're not addressing it through that equity lens, would we come to you as staff, or is there an opportunity to have this submitted to the committee to be discussed and worked on?
Is more like so?
Through the chair, this is exactly what we were thinking and hoping that the purpose of this committee would be, is to provide that lens. And so it depends on, so I think you would work through the staff representation to facilitate that process and to set something up and to make sure that, because we also have to make sure that we don't overwhelm this committee, that this isn't the only avenue that the city has, because we will also have a team of experts who will also be able to do work in this area. And so I think the first point of contact would be the staff person facilitating, who would then be able to either bring things forward to the committee or bring it to the team as in terms of staff. So either of those ways. And I think that was the entire vision for this committee.
Okay.
From a council perspective.
Okay, thank you. My other question has to do with compensation. Has there been any thought put into financial compensation or compensation of any sort to the members of the committee?
Through the chair, yes, there has. And this is something that's been ongoing since we started the task force. This has been an ongoing issue. It is something that the city is currently, so as part of the collaboration with the region, the city is on a working group that is entirely focused on compensation for advisory committees. And we're looking at sort of what the outcome of that regional sort of effort is going to be before making decisions. So there will be some recommendations that come with that regional group, and we do have city members of City of Kitchener who sit on that committee, and so we are keeping a close eye on that. And it's something that we can't, like, because this will be an advisory committee to council, like all of the other advisory committees to council. Right now, it's not something that we can make a decision about, but it would have to be made within the context of all of those. And so that's something that very, very likely or very possibly will come back to council at a later date. But it is something that there are certainly a lot of advocacy for within the city and within the community.
Okay.
Sorry, just a point of clarification if I could. Sorry, Ms. Miller. So just to understand, so it's not looking at compensation just for this committee or a specific subset of committees. It would be looking at sort of all committees broad. So this would apply to cycling, et cetera, potentially.
Well, within that context. So within the context, yeah. I mean, it doesn't mean that all of the committees are going to get compensation. What it might mean is that there might be recommendations around the compensation for specific groups or for specific subpopulations who sit on those committees, because that is kind of the best practice right now in terms of providing compensation. One of the ways that we worked with this, because we weren't able to offer direct compensation for members of the task force, we were able to offer comprehensive coverage of any barrier that people were faced with in terms of sitting on the committee. And so that included transportation costs, childcare costs, anything like the help with IT equipment, sort of having access, especially during the pandemic, remote access and so on. And so that's something that we're certainly committed to. And that's something that in a way, like, works as a form of compensation. We don't want people to be, somehow disadvantaged, in order to take part. So that part is completely, sort of underway in terms of that comprehensive addressing of barriers. But we are looking more towards, we want to have more of a regional approach on this, because there is a lot of collaboration with the other municipalities and the region when it comes to compensation. And so we're just kind of waiting on how that's going to play out, and whether that changes for all of the advisory committees or just certain ones. It's unclear at this point.
We'll save that discussion for another day. Sorry, Councillor Chapman, continue.
No, that's all. Thank you so much.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Ioannidis, I had your hands, you're good, okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Davey. And my question is along the same line as something that Councillor Marsh was bringing up, but I want to put a little slightly different angle on it, in that I think it would be important that there is reporting back from this committee, maybe to many of our different committees, sitting on the Safe and Healthy Communities Committee. I know that certainly this is something that they look at a lot, is how do we look at things through the lens of equity, inclusion, and diversity. So there's going to be a lot of people there that are really interested in the work that's going on here. I don't know if maybe just regular reports from this committee, whether they're written. I don't want to put too much on them, on the committee, and scare people off from being a member of it, perhaps. But that I do think there's going to be a lot of interest across many different committees within the city that will want to hear and be a part of and look at what this committee is doing. So I don't know if you've looked at the committee aspect as well.
So through the chair, we have talked about collaboration amongst committees, and in particular collaboration with committees that are focused specifically on Indigenous reconciliation and that sort of thing, because that's an intersection. But safe and healthy communities as well as like GRAC and MAX, like all of the committees that are looking at enhancing the sort of, if we're, to use the previous language, the rights and privileges of certain groups. This is all part of, this work. And so again, like trying to balance the workload for this committee will be important. So we'll have to make sure that that's not something that's overwhelming, but at the same time, we will also have this team of 5 people who can help support that as well. And so since I've been at the city, I've done numerous presentations at different committees across the city in terms of updating them on what we're doing on the task force and the work moving forward and that sort of thing. And I think that has been quite valuable for those committees. And so that will be part of the role of the staff as well. And so that we wouldn't put all of that work on the work of this committee.
Thanks. That's a really good point that that staff can be helping to deliver that as well. And I think it's exciting that these different groups will be really excited to want to learn more and to hear reports from them. So it's really a good thing at the end of the day. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Rumenovich.
Thanks, thanks, Chair Davey, and thanks again to staff for bringing this report forward. And I really do support, as Councillor Marsh indicated, the notion that the committee would not have councillors on it. It's similar to the Compass Kitchener Committee, because I think it does allow them to do their work without the pressure of elected officials who, just by the virtue, quite frankly, even of us being in the room, at times, it results in there not being the same free-flowing dialogue that might happen otherwise. When we talk about the idea of reporting back, as I recall pre-COVID, and sometimes it's hard to remember because it's been so long ago since we've been pre-COVID, but Compass Kitchener did bring together all of our advisory committees once or twice a year, and council was invited to those sessions. And they updated each other in terms of what each other was doing. So I think that certainly was a good model. So as you continue to explore that, Ellen, that's maybe something to look at and see if you can build on that, both in terms of the work of this committee, but also in terms of that reporting mechanism. And obviously, I think there will be pieces of this work that will need to come to council as part of a regular basis, whether it's how are we doing on, recruitment, how are we doing the next time that we do our employee census, those kinds of things we've committed to being transparent on going forward. And those would obviously come to council as part of a regular, report, whether it's annually or biannually or whatever, going forward. So that's those would be my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Councillor Gazzola.
I have a number of questions. One of the questions I was concerned with is, was any thought given to not establishing this committee at this time, but later on in the process? I look at, we have a completely new department or division of staff. I looked at the organization chart, and I don't know if it's changed within the last couple of weeks, but all the positions are vacant. So there's considerable amount of work I would expect just to establish first our own staff. When the committee does get in place, and it is something that we definitely need to have to complete this cycle, but from what I understand, that committee will report to council, and any decisions to be made will still be made by council. Is that correct?
Through the chair. Good question. And I think that it is, we are at a crossroads right now. Although I will emphasize that we're not starting from the beginning. So what we're doing right now is we're in the process of implementing 7 different deliverables that came out of the task force, including the policy that we just spoke about, the creation of the training strategy that was brought to council back in March, as well as a comprehensive data collection strategy, a communications guide for the city, a community-based granting program that is specifically for racialized communities. So these are just a few of the, or several of the deliverables that are currently being implemented out of the work of the task force. So yes, the task force ended at the end of June, but we developed a huge amount of work out of that I'm now in the process of implementing in collaboration with Suzanne and the team as she develops it. And so what this advisory committee is being created for is really a continuity of community involvement in this work. So for the past 1.5 years, we've had continuous community involvement from members of the task force. And now that the task force is complete, we're creating this advisory committee as a way of continuing that community involvement and particularly providing a mechanism of community accountability specifically for the recommendations of the task force. And these are all of the bodies of work that were presented to council back in May. And so I think what you're suggesting would make sense if we were starting from zero right now, if just having one director and still in the process of hiring 4 staff, but we're not. We have 2 years of work underway and a lot of work that's being moved forward right now. And so, in fact, putting this advisory committee in place right now will help to continue that momentum and to ensure that we are continuing the accountability piece of the work of the task force as opposed to having a gap in that right now. So because the community engagement piece is so important in this work.
All right, I'll go back to my original question now, though, was everything that comes out of the advisory committee go forward to council for final approval?
So through you, Mr. Chair, maybe I can take that. It's going to operate like every other advisory committee. Many things will come to council for a final decision, but some will not because they're operational or community or do not require a decision of city council. So there'll be a mix of both.
Okay. I trust that council will be kept informed of all the decisions that go forward.
Yes, you will.
Yeah. Will this, I'm a little, when reading the report, I get a little concerned when I hear things like we don't want members of council on the committee because we can't have frank and open discussions. Is that really the case, or are we having a frank and open discussion here? Or,
So through the chair, this is something that was brought up, specifically by members of the community who sat on the task force. And it's not that, so when it comes to having frank and open discussions, it's not that it's not possible for council to have frank and open discussions, because this is something that you do on a regular basis with one another. It's more about the power imbalance that happens with community members and members of council sitting in the same space when it comes to talking about very difficult and sensitive things that it's possible that aren't as well understood by members of council. And so it's a level of comfort and safety that people talk about, and also the power of having someone who, as much as you may be an ally and someone who is, friendly and, well-meaning, it's not really about that. It's really about the power structure of someone who sits on council being part of this community, or being part of this community advisory committee. And, these are very real concerns that community members have and have struggled with coming to council, people who, may want to come as delegations to council, but don't feel like they have a place, that sort of thing. I mean, if we look at it strictly from a power perspective, it's that we would have people who hold power versus people who don't in the same committee, and those people who don't may or may not feel comfortable being able to speak, about their own experiences, about their own perspective on things. And so it's not impossible to have frank and open discussion, but it can be limiting. And we want to make sure that we're starting this committee in a way that reflects the community need. And this came very much from the community members in terms of a suggestion for what they wanted to see.
Yeah, I have no problem with where you're going, but when you start to bring up principles like that, they then surely apply to all the committees that we have in the city. Can you please just explain, or I'd like to know what the relationship going forward will be between the staff, the professional staff in this area, and the committee. From my experience, from a lot of the other committees, staff do a lot of the leading, a lot of the supporting, but what will be the case with this new committee? Will this committee lean on staff? Will staff be the leaders of it? Or will the committee be?
So through the chair, yeah, good question. And this is something that we've talked about a lot. And it is something that's outlined in the draft terms of reference that is included in the report. And specifically, so at a sort of at a basic level, this committee will be supported by one or more staff members who are on the Equity, Anti-Racism and Indigenous Initiatives team. And so that staff will play a facilitation role. They will help with administrative duties of the committee, and they will also provide an update monthly on the work that's going on within the Equity, Anti-Racism and Indigenous Initiatives team in terms of what's going on and upcoming work. And so but in terms of the direction of the committee, that is something will be guided entirely by the committee members, and the staff member will not have a vote. So in terms of, if there's decisions being made about priorities and sort of what they want to focus on, the role of the staff member will be to facilitate the meetings and to ensure that everyone, has an ability to speak and share what their voice is. But they won't be like a voting member of the committee, and they won't be the one driving the work of the committee. They will be the one supporting the work. So similar to the role that I played on the task force, I was one staff member overseeing a task force of 45 people that where I did the work, but it was entirely directed by the working groups on the task force. So I would see it being a similar mechanism. We did get feedback from members of the task force that they were very appreciative of having staff collaboration on the task force in terms of being able to decide on direction in order to, for things that actually make sense in terms of how they work at the city. So for example, in the creation of this policy, it was the policy that we just spoke about, it was the members of the working group who are mainly community members who were driving the policy, but I also collaborated with the director of HR and legislative services and other staff members in order to say, like, is this appropriate? Is this something that will work? So that we don't have a committee who has a voice or sort of a direction that's going in one way, whereas the city, that would never work at the city in the other way. And so similar to, I don't know, the other advisory committees, I think they have a similar model in terms of, we want to make sure that this is community driven, but we also want to make sure that it's feasible in terms of what the direction is.
Just a couple of quick more questions, and thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gazzola, there's been no one else in the queue, so I'll let you have your full 10 minutes, but if you want to go ahead and ask a couple more, just be cognizant of time, please.
I can go ahead or what? I'm sorry.
Sorry, yeah, you've been over 10 minutes, but go ahead. This is important. So if you want to finish up, that would be great.
I didn't know that I was using so much time up. Sorry. Is there a nominating committee now established to pick the members for the new advisory committee? Or is this,
So there
will there be
isn't, sorry.
will there be a new nominating committee?
So through the chair, so what we are bringing to council as one of the recommendations is that we create an interim nominating committee to review and select applicants for the inaugural membership appointments of this advisory committee. There is currently a nominating committee in place that is responsible for the review and selection of applicants for all of the other advisory committees to council. And that advisory committee right now lacks diversity in terms of representation, and it was very much recommended by the community members on the task force that that the advisory committee should be made up of people who represent the communities of what we're hoping to have on this committee. And so the suggestion is that we use members who were on the task force to put a call out to all of the community members who sat on the task force to ask them if they would be interested in being part of this inaugural nominating committee. And we will bring those recommendations to council in September to form this interim nominating committee. So this would be a one-time nominating committee to create this advisory committee. Once the advisory committee is in place, that nominating committee will be disbanded, and we will then go through a process of reviewing the current nominating committee that's responsible for all advisory committees right now in order to make recommendations to ensure the diverse representation for future nominating committees, so that we don't have to have two different nominating committees, so that we can have one nominating committee that is representative of the diversity of the city of Kitchener. And so, because right now it's not. So those are the two recommendations being suggested around the nominating committee.
Now, are you asking council to make that decision today? That
I am.
It's not only for your interim nominating committee, but it's for the you will have an interim special nominating committee. But you're asking also for these changes to be made for our normal nominating committee today. You're asking council.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong. You're asking council to approve that today.
Yeah, Councillor Gazzola, it's on the third page of the report.
I've read it all. And I'm just trying to clarify in my mind. My mind moves slow, so just trying to understand.
So through the chair, so what we're asking is to support a staff review of the current nominating committee. And then if any changes are suggested, those would come back to council for approval. So we're not asking for approval for changes to be made right now of the current nominating committee. What we're asking council approval for is to start a review of that process and to come back with a staff report saying, okay, here's the current nominating committee, here's how it was put together, here's some recommended changes that we think should be made in order to make this committee a more diverse representation. And that would come back to council within the next 10 months or so, between now and next summer.
Yeah, okay, that clarifies the situation. My final question is, when things are up and running, will the advisory committee meetings be open to all the public?
Through the chair, yes, they will. Just like all other advisory committee meetings, all advisory committees to council, they will be open to the public.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, that's all the questions we have. I just wanted to again offer quick thanks. Elaine, you answered a whole bunch of questions in this, and really appreciate it. I'm just going to leave one comment. I don't want staff to respond at this point too, but in going through this and seeing the good work that I'm expecting out of this committee, my other thought was that I have a little bit of concern with Safe and Healthy committee. I haven't been on that committee for a long period of time, but as I recall, equity was a significant portion of that committee. And I just want to put it out there that, it might be time for a general review of some of the committees that we have and make sure that they're all fulfilling the roles as expected. But that's a side point to this item here. Okay, so it was moved by Councillor Marsh. Those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Very good. Okay, we'll move on to the final item in Finance and Corporate Services, and that's the RBJ Schlegel sponsorship funding allocation. And again, there is no staff presentation, so if anyone has questions or comments, you could queue in now. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'm just, I have a number of questions on the funding that's being received for this. We're actually looking at $2.3 million, if I'm not wrong, over the 10-year period. Has that 2.3 million been taken into account in our budget of that park? In other words, have we, because of the funding that we're getting from that source, have we lowered the funding coming from the tax basis?
Mr. Lobby.
Through you, Chair Davey. Good afternoon, members of council, and thank you for the question, Councillor Gazzola. No, we haven't yet considered what the 2.3 million, you're quite correct, will be over the course of the 10-year programme. It is quite clear within the sponsorship agreement that it is over and above the base costs of developing the site. The vast majority of the RBJ Schlegel site is being developed under developer charge dollars rather than tax-based dollars.
Okay. So we're at this point. Well, what I'm concerned about is if we've got a price and we've got a budget for that program, is it conceivable that that all of that 2.3 will go to that park or that site as opposed to being shared there with all the sites and all the parks and what have you throughout the city?
Through you, Chair Davey, Councillor Gazzola, there's a need for the Office of Strategic Partnerships have to develop up an internal policy to break down where the sponsorship dollars go across the 4 areas that are highlighted. As you can see, they are fairly specific to RBJ Schlegel Park. So the intent of the sponsorship was to reinvest and to invest in RBJ Schlegel Park and not other parks across the city.
Okay, that leads me to my other question. I read about the Office of Strategic Partnership, and I looked on the organization chart, and I couldn't find it. Where does that sit? Is that?
Ms. Robert, Mr. Bennett, whoever wants to.
Yeah, I can chime in through you, Councillor, through you, Chair Davey. It has resided in corporate services under communications and marketing, but as was alluded to in a previous meeting, it will be transitioning to economic development under the leadership of Brian Bennett in the fall.
Okay, that's fine. Because I was just wondering where if one had any questions, where to go. I have a final request, which is it possible to get a revised or a summary figure of what that Schlegel Park, what that whole complex, how much we've spent on it, and what the entire budget for it is. It's possibly the largest undertaking dollar-wise of the city. So I'm just asking, no concerns with it, but is it possible just to get a summary of the total costs of that project?
Through you, Chair Davey, I'm more than happy to provide that to Councillor Davey on my return from vacation about a week and a half time. I can say that phase 1 is around about $11 million, and phase 2, which we're currently in, is around $4 million.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. There's no rush. It would just be nice to see the total picture. Yeah, thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Up next is Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, I have no questions. I'm just prepared to move the recommendation at the appropriate time.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm glad to see some of the improvements that are outlined through the sponsorship dollars. I think we're learning from the use of this park, especially speaking to the cricket field netting. My question to staff is, with this netting, will that allow league play on the cricket pitch, or is the size of that pitch still prohibitive for more wider usage?
Mr. Lovely.
So through you, Chair Davey. I'm sitting with the sun in my background. I can't see my screen well. I do apologise. The cricket field will be used by, if we undertake the improvements, will be able to be used by adult league players. We've had it indicated it probably wouldn't be for top flight league play, more for practice, adult league play rather than just the junior play, which is being used at the minute. But that would be potentially an option once the netting is in place and we get a chance to see how the adults play on it.
So what is the limiting factors for adult league play, or the top league play for this field? Is it, again, my original question, to the size, just as we learn from it, and if there's opportunities to build other cricket pitches in our city, so that we take lessons learned from this?
Through you, Chair Davey, yes, size is the limiting factor on this one, even though turning and putting the nets up will allow for us to manage balls carrying into areas we don't want them to carry into. You are still talking about a field which is going to be on the smaller side, and so probably not due for that top flight play, not large enough for that top flight play. We did, when we were looking at the various different options, we did consider whether there were other sites where we could relocate a top flight cricket field to, and the city currently doesn't have anywhere big enough or clear enough to be able to accommodate that.
Okay, well, I think that's a wider discussion to be had, and it's important that we're looking at that and what we're experiencing. But I'm glad to see the change that we want to make, because even the cricket pitch there, the fields supporting younger players is definitely needed, that additional space. So glad to see that. My last question is on the sign, and absolutely supportive. Of course, we have to have adequate signage for the park of this size and the significance of this park. But the signage is also built into the sponsorship agreement. This may be more of a comment than a question, but it would be hopeful in the future that the costs are related on top of what the sponsorships dollars that come in, that overall bring improvements to the park. Was that at all considered, that this would be above and beyond the sponsorship commitment, that it comes from the namesake participants? Or is that something that we would strive to do in the future? Not to say that we will renege on our agreement now, but just asking in general.
Through you, Chair Davey, I have the signage costs are actually going to be a shared cost. There were two different interpretations on the agreement, which is why these are not actually backed into the base budget for Schlegel Park and coming out from the sponsorship funds to make up for the interpretation differences of the sponsorship agreement. But the intent before we started was that the sponsor should be paying for the signage. They are paying for some of it, they're just not paying for quite all of it.
Okay, a lot of lessons learned. Thank you. Supportive of the item that's being moved by Councillor Galloway.
Okay, that concludes all the questions. It's been moved by Councillor Galloway Seelock. Those in favor? And opposed? No, none are opposed. Very good. And that, so that concludes Finance and Corporate Services. I'm sure Councillor Johnson was in favor of that. I saw her hand up, I swear. That concludes Finance and Corporate Services, and we have a bonus half an hour break time, guys. Great work, and we'll see you.